Welcome everyone. The presentation is about to begin. This session will be recorded and will last about 90 minutes. Please keep your microphone muted during the presentation and turn off your web camera. If you have a question or comment, enter it in the chat during the presentation and your question will be addressed by the presenter at the end. Actually, the way we're planning on doing this is that if you have a clarification question for an individual presenter, feel free to pose that during their session. But we'd like to save discussion until the end of all four presentations. So if you've got a larger question, hold on to that until all four presenters have finished their presentations. But brief clarification questions could be asked at the end of each individual session. All participants in today's event will have access to the recorded version, which will be available within 1 week after the live event. You'll be sent a link from TESOL with the access to the recorded version, which you'll be free to share with anybody. It's on the TESOL YouTube channel. So TESOL International Association's Second Language Writing Intersection is pleased to present the webinar entitled, I can't remember, Diversity in L2 Writing, Creating Inclusive Pedagogical and Administrative Approaches. We're very pleased to welcome you to this webinar. My name is Betsy Gilliland, and I will be your moderator for today's event. So let me share my screen and show you our introductory slides. That is not the introductory slides. Okay, can you see the, sorry about this. Okay. All right, that's full screen. So welcome to the Second Language Writing Intersection panel, Diversity in L2 Writing, Creating Inclusive Pedagogical and Administrative Approaches. I'm Betsy Gilliland, the past chair of the Second Language Writing Intersection. This is a session that was organized for the TESOL 2020 International Convention. And because of pandemic reasons, the conference itself was canceled. And so we decided to reschedule it as this webinar rather than wait until next year's conference, because we think this is a really important topic and we're very excited to share it with all of you. So just briefly, for those of you that are not familiar, the Second Language Writing Intersection is one of TESOL's largest communities of practice. We have 1,100 or more members on the TESOL registration. We hold regularly scheduled webinars and online discussions. Usually each year we also coordinate a joint online session with the Conference on College Composition and Communications Second Language Writing Standing Group, which allows us to talk across fields within second language writing. We also are currently running a book club where members read a book related to second language writing. And we organize multiple sessions for the TESOL annual convention, including an academic session, which will be a panel similar to this, as well as intersections where we work with another TESOL intersection. And we also hold a business meeting. So we welcome everybody to join us to talk about how our group is run. And we also, anybody who's a TESOL member is welcome to join and run as part of our steering committee to coordinate what we do in this group. So the goal of this session is to think about diversity in all its different ways. Merriam-Webster Dictionary's definition is pretty nice. Basically, the condition of having or being composed of differing elements. and especially the inclusion of different types of people, such as people in different races or cultures in a group or organization. And that's the focus we'll be taking today. Diversity is not just race, not just culture, it's also age and ability and visibility for populations. So the speakers will be presenting in this order, and each one will share for about 15 minutes. And then at the end, we will have about 15 to 20 minutes where we can actually have an open discussion. So we encourage you to stick around until the end to participate in the discussion. First presenter will be Megan Cizik, talking about global diversity in the classroom, inclusive pedagogy, followed by Aileen Atulgan-Relyeya, talking about needs analysis, a powerful tool for creating equity and inclusive pedagogical and curricular practices in L2 settings, followed by Carrie Torres, talking about digital tools to support English learners with disabilities in writing. And our final speaker, Shauna Shapiro, will talk about tapping into the funds of knowledge of refugee background writers. So I will turn it over to Megan.
Thank you so much, Betsy. And welcome everyone. I'm really pleased to be here for this important session. Sorry we had to postpone it, but we may have a wider reach by being able to present it in this medium. So as Betsy said, my name is Megan Cizik. I'm with the George Washington University in Washington, DC. I've included here my email address because unfortunately I cannot stay through the whole panel into the Q&A. So please don't hesitate to email me if you have questions or comments about my presentation. I would be more than happy to respond. Also, some of my colleagues can probably answer some questions if they come up when I'm not here. So what I'm going to be talking about in my presentation is a project, an initiative that we undertook in our EAP program to create an online interactive faculty resource that promotes inclusive pedagogy in light of our globally diverse classrooms in which we now teach. As I said, I'm with the EAP program. We are an academic unit under the Arts and Sciences College at GW, and we primarily teach academic writing courses for matriculated international students. We also have some oral academic communication classes, and we teach some discipline-specific grad level EAP classes. We teach students from all across the programs and schools at the university, and indeed from all across the world. So it's a very diverse student population. And I wanted to draw your attention to one part of our philosophy of our program that goes beyond just our classroom-based teaching. We see our role at the university as advocacy, as part of GW's larger initiative toward internationalization and engaging global perspectives. And we try to serve as advocates for international students whom we think are rich resources for global engagement in our campus teaching and learning environments. I highlight that because it's part of what motivated us to create this online resource. So as you all know, I'm sure, in recent years, there's been increasing global mobility, a lot of movement for higher education and other purposes, although not right now because of COVID, but I'm hopeful that this will return soon. This coincides with universities who are strategically engaging in internationalization activities, one of which is the recruitment and enrollment of international students. So what we see as a result of these phenomena is that our classrooms are increasingly becoming sites of global engagement. However, despite the opportunity of all of this global engagement, we find ourselves still locked into these kind of status quo institutional environments. Research has shown that internationalization efforts rarely penetrate our teaching and learning environments in meaningful or sustained ways. There is also often an expectation that international students adapt or assimilate to our existing institutional and curricular frameworks, and these tend to be monolingual and monocultural. Members of our communities, faculty, staff, and administrators have also been found to have a deficit or at least a difference orientation toward international students, especially those who speak English as a second or additional language. And we have also found that content and language tend to be viewed as separate or distinct domains within the institution, meaning disciplinary and subject-specific faculty are responsible for teaching content, and support or peripheral units like EAP or ESL are responsible for language. And this creates a kind of a segregationist institutional structure that mirrors in a way the marginalization that international students sometimes experience. So how do we move beyond these status quo constraints? We hope that guides like the one that we developed will be a helpful resource for this purpose. So what we did in our program was long a goal of ours to create an online interactive faculty resource for teachers across the curriculum, across schools and programs. And we wanted this to be a kind of framework for faculty empowerment. This online faculty development resource takes a reflective and strengths-based approach to pedagogy for today's globally diverse classrooms. And it was also really important to us that it drew upon the strength of our field of EAP faculty in our program, of our interdisciplinary and pedagogical expertise, and the research and best practices that we've developed through collective scholarship for many years. We hope that this guide will encourage faculty to reorient their thinking and their practice about their empowerment and offset discourses. What I'm going to do next is take you into the guide and just do a quick talk through of how we designed it, some of the decisions that we made, and some of the content that we chose to include. So you can see here the entry point for our faculty resource. We chose to use Adobe Creative Cloud, Adobe Spark webpage, because we wanted it to be professional and dynamic and easy to design, easy to update, easy to access. And it was an excellent platform for that purpose. So essentially, when we started thinking about design, we wanted to make sure that we situated the design in the brand of the institution and within our own institutional community. So we used fonts and colors and images and graphics and links from the university. And we presented preliminary information on the guide like this. We started with a snapshot of GW's global landscape, some information about our student population and how diverse they are, with links to some more strategic messaging from the university. And a map to show the geographical diversity of our international students. And then the next thing we included was really important because we wanted to make sure that one of the first things faculty saw was the student perspective. We wanted to foreground that student perspective in order to make this guide as helpful as it could be. So we surveyed students with 3 simple questions. What do you wish your professors knew about you? What do you find the most challenging about being a GW international student? And describe one situation in which a professor created a positive learning experience for you. And so faculty can read some quotes from this research. Eventually, we'd love to have short videos or audio recordings from students so they can hear their voices as well. But we wanted to make sure to include student voices and perspectives early in the guide. We also have a description about the purpose of the guide and what we hope to do, with a very clear link to our program, to the college that we're housed in, and a statement about how the guide was developed based on the interdisciplinary and pedagogical expertise of our faculty and in reflection of our program's commitment to supporting and valuing international students in our campus community. We also talk a little bit about terminology. We target international students who speak English as a second or additional language, but we want to make it clear that this is not a monolithic group and that we should be very careful not to make assumptions about students who are called international We should avoid sweeping generalizations or assuming that we know our students simply because we know which country they come from or which language they speak. We also give some possible uses of the guide. We see its most critical opportunities as building understanding of our international student population to empower students for success by empowering faculty, to address specific areas of concern, to experiment with new teaching techniques and innovate our curricula, to engage in faculty professional development, and to learn about support resources. The guide is organized into 5 main sections. And the first one is the meat of the guide. It's the most important and I think the most useful for faculty. So I'm going to take you in there and give you a quick tour. This section is called Empower Your Pedagogy Resources for Faculty. So what we have done here is we've tried to identify 7 domains, 7 key areas of opportunity. We deliberately decided not to focus on grammar, listening, speaking, writing as our categories. We wanted to be more comprehensive and holistic in our approach to these domains. So we've started with 7 domains and we may build these out more later. And as you can see, they're fairly comprehensive in their scope. For each of these domains, we start with pedagogic reflection because we want faculty to start by reflecting before they try to grab any teaching tips or figure out some solution to a problem. So for example, in this domain, which focuses on socialization into a classroom community, we ask faculty to think about a time they were new to an academic setting. How did they feel? How did they perceive themselves relative to this new environment? And then to imagine that they're from a different linguistic and cultural background, and what would that experience be like? Finally, they're asked to reflect on their own assumptions about the students that they teach. In this way, it can prime them for the teaching tips that will come later. And then each domain has 10 teaching tips, concise, action-oriented, that they can put into practice for a more inclusive pedagogy. Each of these domains is accompanied by a downloadable PDF file that is similarly branded institutionally and can be printed or shared that contains the same information. In addition, this section about empowering faculty has a link to Purdue University's excellent resource about working with grad writers because their experience and needs tend to be very distinct. And we also created 2 resource documents during COVID to help support both faculty and students in working with students, working online and in hybrid contexts. So here is an example of a guide for faculty who are teaching international students. And we also have one for students, international students studying online. And the others of the guide that we created are here, and I'll just very quickly talk through each one. We have a link here of supporting resources for international students. Faculty are not always aware of what's out there in the university, and we wanted to compile everything in one place so that it was easy to access. We have academic resources, living and well-being, and engagement. We also created a section of resources that can be shared directly with students in order to facilitate student agency. And these are external links, things that we've used in our own teaching that we found particularly helpful for our students. So faculty can find those and share them with their own students. We also have a section that focuses more broadly on internationalization, policy, data, some scholarship for faculty who want to learn more. And finally, we compiled additional resources, notably lots of books and materials from our own field. These were a lot of the materials that we used to generate content for this guide, and a few articles and other resources. We also have a short video about the transition from home country educational systems into US higher ed, and a few quick tips. And as you can see, again, we've got branding at the bottom and a link to our webpage. We see this guide as being really helpful for a number of reasons, as kind of a conduit for faculty development. Easy to access, easy to share, easy to update, everything together in one place. Faculty can take a deep dive and learn a lot, or just grab something they might need. And its main goal is to help faculty from across the disciplines understand international students and develop culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogy. It's also a repository for support and resources all put together in one place and easy to find. And we think that this guide can serve as a basis for systematic faculty professional development, whether at a departmental level, an institutional level, through a teaching and learning center. We see this as an opportunity for faculty from across the university to engage in professional development based on their own needs. And also that means I won't get hundreds of questions every semester or be asked to develop and facilitate a workshop, because material is there for others to take advantage of. I will conclude with a couple of final thoughts. As I said before, it was very important to us that this guide was situated in our own institutional context, although the guidance, the information, would be helpful across multiple institutions, multiple student populations, multiple settings. We wanted to make sure that we were building it in as part of an inclusive approach to teaching international students here in this community. But it also maps very well with larger university diversity and inclusion initiatives. And we wanted to make sure it was inclusive of faculty from across the university, not just EAP or writing program faculty, but from all disciplines, schools, and programs. We're also happy that this guide helps increase the visibility of our EAP program and the work that we do in our field. Not everyone recognizes our work, our scholarship, our teaching, because we're sometimes peripheral to the institution. So that was another goal that we had. And in conclusion, this faculty guide that we developed helps promote greater awareness of who our international students are, the value they bring to our campus communities, their experiences in the classes we teach, and how we can develop practices that support and engage them. Thank you very much for your attention, and don't hesitate to email me if you have questions or comments.
Thank you, Megan. That was just about perfect timing also. Excellent. There's been several questions about whether you're able to share the guide. Is that a public link that you could put in the chat? Or
I'll drop the link in the chat.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so our next presenter is Aylin Atılgan-Vureliye. And I will let her share her screen.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Megan, for that wonderful presentation. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And I am the current chair of the Second Language Writing Interest section this year. And I work at Santa Rosa Junior College. And the title of my presentation today is Needs Analysis, a powerful tool for creating equity and inclusive pedagogical and curricular practices in diverse L2 writing settings. Okay, so I'd like to first give you an overview of my presentation. First of all, we're going to look at the international student diversity in the US, and then we're going to define needs analysis. Next, I would like to provide an example of an institutional needs assessment of Chinese international students conducted at Purdue University. I would like to focus on findings as they inform inclusive practices in this presentation. And finally, I'm going to be giving a couple of inclusive strategies. But first of all, I would like to start by looking at the international student numbers in the US this year. we have a little over 1 million international students, and this is its 5th consecutive year where we had more than 1 million students in the US. And as you know, we are a very diverse educational setting in the United States over here. And the top countries that send their students to America are China and India. And they really send 53% of international students to America. From here on, I would like to talk about the study that I designed, and I would like to provide this situational context for my environment. So it is Introductory Composition at Purdue University, and shortly it's called ICAP. ICAP has 2 kinds of composition courses, English 106, which is designed for L1 writers, and English 106I, designed specifically for L2 writers, multilingual writers. And in 2021, there was a sudden increase in the international student numbers at Purdue. And all of a sudden, we found ourselves very limited because we had limited number of English 106I sections where international students usually prefer to enroll. So because of the limitation, international students enrolled in English 106I, the mainstream composition course designed mostly for L1 writers. And so it became English 106 became a host with a diverse group of students with different proficiency levels. Okay, so what was the problem? There was not enough time to change policies, so English 106 curriculum and practices remained the same. There was no time to create inclusive strategies. There was no ESL training provided for instructors. And there was a one-fits-all syllabi of different syllabi approaches, but that wasn't, of course, catering the needs of all the students involved. And many instructional challenges and concerns were expressed by teaching assistants to the ICAP director and the professors involved with writing. So there was an urgent and realistic need to investigate the needs of L2 writers in English 106 courses. So I wanted to do a preliminary research and a little qualitative pilot study to identify the general rhetorical, linguistic, and strategic needs of L2 writers in mainstream composition courses. And this study was informed by studies that focused on international student needs in L2. Now, my research was a small-scale qualitative study, and it involved semi-structured interviews with 3 American English 106 instructors with varying experience, and I asked them 20 questions. And even though I had 3 instructors, I received very rich data because of the varying experiences that TAs had. Let me focus on some findings here. The instructors reported the lacks and needs of international students to be more class participation in class discussions, more involvement in group work, understanding of instructions, more time for multiple drafts, more language support in terms of grammar, more directive guidance in following assignments and classroom instructions, diversity in reading texts and materials, not only American culture bound. And international students do have affective needs such as social, emotional, cognitive, and control needs. Now, impetus for my study arose from the fact that even though there was ongoing collaborative work in the introductory composition program at Purdue, there was no comprehensive research on the needs of international students. There was no teacher training on ESL teaching for English 106 instructors, and instructors are TAs. And the Chinese students were the biggest population in these courses. and there was no needs assessment conducted before. Here, let me try to define needs analysis according to Brown. And as we know, needs analysis are also defined as needs assessments. Needs analysis and needs assessments can be used interchangeably, basically. So systematic collection and analysis of all subjective and objective information necessary to define and validate defensible curriculum purposes that satisfy the language learning requirements of students within the context of particular institutions that influence the learning and teaching situation. Now, needs analysis in L2 writing has become pretty important and has gained popularity over the years. And Flowerdew states a needs analysis enables L2 instructors and tutors who take on a dual researcher come teacher role to design purposive, tailor-made classroom materials instead of just relying on teacher intuition. And Long states better conducted needs analysis, after all, will enhance the quality of language programs based upon them, and thereby the success rate for language learners. So basically, a needs assessment is good for designing tailor-made classroom materials and enhancing the quality of language programs and increasing the success rate for language learners, which I aim to do. Here, I would like to deliver my needs analysis design to you following Flowerdew's 3 steps in needs analysis design. So her first question is, what is the purpose of your needs analysis? So the purpose of my needs analysis was to describe the needs of Chinese students from their own perspective and instructors' perspective, to improve the effectiveness of the curriculum at ICAP and treat the inequality, and to make the mainstream course more inclusive. Her other question is, what kind of writing tasks are your students expected to compose in? Well, I did not know. I had no idea. I had to ask my students and I had to look at their syllabi, to have an idea of what they were expected to compose in. What kind of skills are the students expected to be familiar with to compose these tasks? Well, composing, drafting, pre-writing, post-writing skills, revision skills, research skills, organization skills, computer skills, just to name a few. Okay, next, I wanted to contextualize my setting. So, okay, my contextual setting is introductory composition at Purdue, and the student profile is L1 and L2 students taking mainstream composition, and they have the same syllabus and the assignments are the same for all students, regardless of the diversity, right? So one fits all syllabus. And we had close to 50% international students in English 106. So all of a sudden, our writing lab, Purdue Writing Lab, became a main hub visited mostly by Chinese students. It was a very popular place. So how does my contextualized setting help me? Many empirical studies share a common failure of overgeneralization and stereotyping with regard to a large nation. So this helped me avoid overgeneralization and stereotyping and hear the voices of tutors, instructors, and students. Chinese students, I would like to acknowledge them. They're a wonderful addition to the US education system, bring a wealth of ideas, values, reflecting their culture and individuality, adding cultural diversity to higher education. This study by no means overlooks the great effort and their valuable work. On the contrary, it appreciates them and aims to find areas of needs so that these students can be further supported in their academic journey. And my research questions were, what are the linguistic, rhetorical, and strategic needs of Chinese students according to instructors, according to themselves, and do the opinions match up? These questions were based on Silva's statement that L1 and L2 show salient and important rhetorical, linguistic, and strategic differences. And this study aimed to explore differences to accommodate differences with a universal design. So this was my research design, a triangulation study, surveys, interviews, written text analysis, and in that order. A triangulation method seeks convergence, corroboration, and correspondence results from different methods. So that's what I was going to do for for reliable results. And I did a mixed study method research. And the needs and lacks of students were reported as lack of audience, genre awareness, lack of audience, lack of genre awareness, lack of organization and academic writing conventions, some problems with vocabulary, word choice, punctuation, sentence structure, and spelling. Students really lacked composing strategies. They said, what's a strategy? I just think in my head. I write whatever comes to my mind. I write on computer, delete and easily copy and paste, which can be understandable. And instructors reported lacks and needs as lack of audience awareness, argumentation, direct expression, Anglo-American rhetorical conventions, linguistic article use, prep, subject-verb agreement, some of those. And strategic problems, again, lack of composing strategies, but the instructor said that students are good at getting outside help because they use the writing lab regularly. Now, my text analysis informed that the ambiguity in the writing was caused mostly by lexical errors, not syntactical, and that's something important to note here. And rhetorical analysis, some features of Chinese rhetorical patterns, lack of cohesive ties, digressive discussion using analogy for argumentation, flowery and metaphoric language, but the tutors did appreciate the flowery and metaphoric language. Sometimes they had difficulty understanding it, but they liked it because it was very creative and fun. And lack of higher order skills, citation, and formatting. Now, I would like to finally provide some inclusive strategies here. Use of language. If your institution's low admission requirements, language admission requirements are low, please do provide language support in the institution. Writing peer support groups, writing retreats, provide grammar instruction, inform students about resources, including disability resources, and educate teachers, ESL diversity in cultural training. Don't let them sink or swim, help them provide professional development opportunities, and familiarize yourself with the practices in China in writing policies and ELT. And I'm going to conclude on this slide over here. Affect and cultural sensitivity is the last but not the least point I'd like to make. It's the most important, I think. Please acknowledge the rhetorical conventions of Chinese language and respect students' way of expressing themselves. Learn how to pronounce the names of your students and show interest in their lives. I'm sure you all do this, but it is very important for affect. And allow multiple modes of communication, interaction, and participation. Show cultural sensitivity. Watch out for sense of humor because it may come across as offensive. Speak clearly, slowly, and kindly, as this really decreases the anxiety of our students. And I can continue with these slides later in the question and answer session because I don't have time anymore. But I'd like to leave you with this. How high is your score in diversity metrics? Schools that score high in diversity metrics are those with the greatest variety in ethnicity, gender, age, and geographic location of origin. How high is your score in diversity metrics? If it is high, you need more equity and inclusion strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Aylan. That was right on time. So our next presenter, Carrie Torres, is not feeling well right now, so she's pre-recorded her presentation as a video, but she's with us in the session. So if you have questions, feel free to pose them in the chat and she can respond in chat. So I'll start Carrie's video. Oh, hold on a sec. Sorry. set the share the sound. Okay. Full screen.
Hi, today I'm going to talk about using digital tools to support English learners with disabilities. I'll start with a brief overview of common challenges and then share some strategies for supporting academic writing with digital tools. The digital tools that I am going to share are free and can be used to support learners in online and face-to-face environments. Before talking specifically about English learners with disabilities, I want to highlight that learner variability is the norm. Dr. Stephen Shore summed it up well when he said that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. The majority of English learners who have disabilities have a specific learning disability, a speech and language impairment, are on the autism spectrum, have another health impairment, which includes attention deficit disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. While all of our English learners with disabilities are unique with their own strengths, cultural funds of knowledge, and challenges, there are some common challenges that we can address strategically, and that's what I want to discuss today. I'm going to organize the common challenges in three main areas. The first is in understanding. Many English learners with disabilities don't have a clear understanding of what's expected in college-level academic writing, or what's expected for different genres, or even that there are different genres and that writing a personal narrative requires a different format or language than writing a persuasive text. In addition, many students struggle to break down the topic that they're expected to write about. And often, with multi-part assignments, learners miss some or all of the criteria in their writing. When it comes to producing writing, even if English learners with disabilities understand the expectations, they also often struggle more than their peers to generate ideas, and it's very hard to produce good writing when you don't have well-developed ideas on a topic. In addition, organization and cohesion, or connecting ideas and maintaining a thread, is often a challenge. English learners with disabilities also typically make fewer and less substantial revisions, often because they don't understand how to check their work and revise. And of course, grammar, vocabulary, and mechanics are more challenging for these learners to apply correctly. The third category is executive function, and some or all areas of executive function can be impacted among students with specific learning disabilities and ADD, ADHD. However, EL students also face challenges with short-term memory when writing because they expend so much mental energy processing what vocabulary and grammar structure to use to express an idea that they often are unable to also think about topic alignment, organization, and cohesion. It's just too many things to keep in your head at one time. In addition, many students, EL and students with disabilities, have struggled unsuccessfully in writing, and that can develop in learned helplessness or a lack of self-confidence and self-efficacy, which then impacts their ability to persist in writing tasks. So learners with disabilities and English learners with interrupted formal schooling will also often face challenges with task initiation and completion, time management, and understanding how to break down multi-step assignments or longer-term projects. To address these challenges and reduce the barriers that our learners face to understanding the expectations and producing academic writing and persisting in that task, we can start by providing explicit genre instruction and providing examples and exemplars of different genres of writing, what they look like and what the expectations are. That should be coupled with explicit strategy instruction because many struggling writers have no idea what strategies good writers employ or why they do. In addition, analyzing and identifying genre elements in exemplars helps to solidify students' understanding more than simple instruction can. Another important element for ELs with disabilities is modeling everything from analyzing an exemplar to the entire writing process so that the students have a clear target for the expectations and the expected process. Also, explicitly chunking the writing process and using collaboration as a scaffolding for understanding and generating ideas can be really important to support these learners. And finally, multimodal support and tools can help learners through the process of drafting and writing. So you can see we have these two main areas of understanding the expectations and the process, and then producing writing. The executive function challenges are often bundled in with the production. So let's look at how to support these different challenges using digital tools. The first step is to develop a deep understanding of the expectations for the product and the process through explicit genre and strategy instruction and modeling. To do this, the teacher can create a screencast of themselves, annotating the criteria for an assignment and breaking it down. Then, with an exemplar, the teacher can deconstruct the text, color coding or highlighting different genre elements and noting how the information aligns to the criteria. Then, to teach students how to create an outline, the teacher can model creating what I call a reverse outline from the text. This can help students see the relationship between an outline and a piece of writing. It can also reinforce that an outline is not a complete essay of full sentences in outline form, but simply keywords and notes. Often English learners will write their entire essay in the form of an outline and then just recopy it, which is twice the work and doesn't often serve the purpose that an outline should. The teacher can then provide an additional exemplar and have students annotate the exemplar, which can be done using the highlight tool with a color key in Google Docs. Students can also practice and receive feedback on creating a reverse outline from the second exemplar. This is an example of slides I use to break down the criteria, annotate text, and create a reverse outline. I don't have time to show you my screencast of it, but you can get the idea from this. The next example is a fillable outline using Google Slides with the outline as the background and text boxes on top. So it really forces them to use just keywords and notes. And in Google Slides, I can write comments and give feedback in real time. The teacher can continue to model the writing process by showing the process of creating a new outline for a new topic using the same format as the reverse outline. And then the teacher can model how to turn the outline of notes into sentences, paragraphs, etc. I usually do this time lapse when I screencast, so they get the general idea, but I don't have them watch me type out every sentence. I also use mnemonics to help students remember what to include in different genres of writing. So I model how to go back and check that I have addressed all of the criteria and included all of the genre elements. I use an adaptation from self-regulated strategy development, Tide and Tree for informative and persuasive writing to help students remember the different elements to be included. The mnemonic makes it very easy for them to memorize and then use when they go back and check. But again, modeling this process also makes it really easy. Students also benefit from explicit instruction on how to revise and edit. So I do this with an example text that is not great, that is missing some elements and didn't address the criteria. Students can then follow the model and continue checking the poor example, and in Google Docs, use the suggestion mode or comment feature to identify areas that should be revised. It's much easier for students to understand how to go through the process of editing and revising and what to edit and revise when they see a model and then when they practice on an example text prior to doing it in their own writing. After ensuring that students deeply understand the expectations for academic writing, additional supports can be integrated to facilitate their own independent or collaborative writing. As mentioned previously, many students struggle to generate ideas, so creating opportunities for group discussion and brainstorming of the topic is really beneficial. Digital tools that can support this are Zoom or Google Meets for real-time description, or Flipgrid, which is an asynchronous video discussion platform. It can also be helpful to have students document the discussion so they can refer back to it when they're writing. And this can be done by pairing it with digital bulletin board apps like Padlet or Jamboard. But this could also be done with a table or graphic organizer on a Google Doc. Many ELs with disabilities may still struggle to take notes in outline and create a cohesive piece of writing. So having students write out in simple phrases or sentences to express their ideas with the help of images and possibly first language support or audio recording their ideas first can help to bridge that gap. This can be done with a template in Google Slides or an app like Book Creator to guide students how to organize their ideas, what should be in each section, and then help them to get the ideas out and express what they want to say without the added pressure and confine of grammatically correct sentences and paragraphs. After receiving feedback, they can then transfer those ideas into more formal writing. If the class is really struggling, this can first be done as a collaborative activity with a collaborative outline and then collaborative writing with peer and teacher feedback. Once they are ready to write independently, it's still a good idea to include the group collaboration to discuss and brainstorm their ideas. Google Docs and Google Slides are great tools for this independent or collaborative writing because as the teacher, you can add comments in real time with feedback and students can reply with questions or their own thoughts. And there's an additional free plugin called Kaizena, which allows teachers and students to leave audio comments, and it has an integrated rubric as well. Of course, English learners often struggle with language too, so including targeted explicit instruction on specific language forms and structures that are required for the genre or assignment can be really helpful. The teacher can screencast a lesson identifying the forms and structures in the exemplar text that was previously used, eliminating the need for learners to work to comprehend a new text. And then students can highlight those elements or note those elements in their writing to allow for targeted feedback from the teacher. In addition, there are a number of online apps like Grammarly and Quill, as well as speech to text that can support students in their writing. Grammarly and Quill can be really helpful to help learners who are struggling with grammar and structures that are much lower than the level of what might be covered in the class, because they help the learner independently. Screencasting instructions for how to access, install, and use these apps can really support learners to maximize the benefits of these tools and not to become an additional barrier. Finally, many of the challenges with executive function are supported by the strategies and processes previously outlined, and the addition of providing incremental deadlines and progress timelines or checklists can help students manage their time and projects. This can be done with Google Forms, calendar reminders, or even a shared Google Sheet so that students can track their own progress and see how they're doing in relation to classmates on longer-term assignments with multi-steps. Also, for learners who are lacking in self-confidence, regular, timely, and specific formative feedback is essential so they know what they are doing well and what they need to continue working on. This can also be done with Kaizena in Google Docs. In Google Docs using regular comments, or in Kaizena using text and audio comments, as well as the built-in rubric feature. To reiterate, learners need us to explicitly teach everything that we expect to see and that we expect them to do. They also need us to model what the outcome looks like, in addition to key skills, processes, and applications that we want them to use. The ability to practice with exemplars and reinforce understanding and use collaboration and specific formative feedback are also important scaffolds to get our students to independent academic writing. I also encourage you to bring the support of the digital tools forward into the face-to-face classroom when we return, because the benefit of added discussion and the ability to go back and watch a teacher's explicit instruction and modeling multiple times if necessary is invaluable. Of course, many of our ELs with disabilities may still need individualized supports, especially in K-12 settings if they have IEPs, and in higher education, our Gen 1.5 students, international students, students with interrupted schooling, and other groups also have unique needs that may need additional support. But this is a really brief overview, just touching on a few strategies that can reduce many of the barriers and make instruction and writing more accessible for our diverse learners. So as I mentioned, this was a really brief overview. There's so much more that I could go into detail in all of these different areas. So here are a few resources where I have detailed these different processes, so you can check out some of these for more detailed descriptions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. As I mentioned before, Carrie is in this group and is responding in the chat. So if you have any specific questions for her, feel free to post. So now our final presenter is Shauna Shapiro.
Sorry about that. Just getting my Google slide up and running. I'm going to post in the chat here the link to my Google slides in case that's useful for folks. If I can get to the chat, let's see, there it is. Okay, hope this will work for folks. This has been a really wonderful panel and I'm so honored to be part of it. So I'm going to be talking today about tapping into the funds of knowledge of refugee background students. And I wanted to ask to kind of get us started, and you can either physically raise your hand or if you can do it through Zoom, how many of you have heard of funds of knowledge before? I'm kind of curious among TESOL folks if it's pretty widely known. I'm just sort of scrolling through to see, I see some thumbs up. I see a few hands here and there, yeah, okay. It's been an exciting framework for me to learn about recently in the past few years. So it's something that I see more in K through 12 education. And so one of the things that excites me about it is that I think those of us working in higher ed can learn a lot. Sometimes there's this assumption that the K through 12 folks need to learn from us, but I think it also can work both ways. So the Funds of Knowledge framework is one oriented in the assets of culturally and linguistically diverse groups of students. And it's not just about students, but it's also about their families and their communities and how they can serve as a resource. And it focuses on opportunities to highlight and build on cultural and linguistic knowledge, which we've already heard referenced in some of the other fantastic presentations today. Also other forms of knowledge, scientific knowledge, for example, students who come from a cultural background where herbal medicine is a key part of the culture, so the familial knowledge, that can be another fund of knowledge. And then there's other resources too. Social and emotional learning is something that our colleagues in K through 12 are talking a lot about. And I think it's something that we, again, can learn from them. So as I talk about funds of knowledge, one of the things that has been important to me in my research is to not think of them as all necessarily the same in terms of what they offer to students and what they offer to our school communities. So one of the critiques of funds of knowledge has been that at times it has kind of had this celebratory tone of let's celebrate everything that students bring, which is wonderful, that's important, but sometimes we've lost the focus on equity. How do these funds of knowledge actually benefit students, and how can we set up structures and curricula that make it more likely that these funds of knowledge will be of use and of value, will be recognized as having use and value in the classroom. So I'm highlighting in my research today, and also what I've been reading in the research of others, particular funds of knowledge that I think are very relevant to the work that we do in second language writing and in English for academic purposes more broadly. So why am I focusing on refugee background students? I live in Burlington, Vermont, which is a refugee resettlement community. And I edited a book that came out co-edited, that came out a couple of years ago about refugee background students. And one of the questions we had to ask ourselves was, are these students with refugee backgrounds, are they distinct enough to be considered as a distinct group? And what do they have in common? And of course, we have refugees and asylum seekers from many different places with many different life stories. So we always want to keep in mind that when we have a label, that label is not intended to kind of homogenize or overlook the differences among within that group. But some of the things to know that are kind of contextual information, the United States used to be one of the top 3 receiving countries for refugee resettlement, along with Canada and Australia. And of course, during the Trump administration, that went down significantly. And I am hoping that with a new administration, we will see an increase to numbers or even beyond the numbers that we had before, because there have been a number of documented benefits of refugee resettlement, including economic benefits, actually, that refugees or former refugees buy houses at a higher rate, they start businesses at a higher rate than some other groups. So there are a lot of benefits in addition to, of course, the humanitarian and cultural and all these other benefits that refugee resettlement brings to communities. Also, there's some interesting complexity that many refugee background students bring in terms of stories and identities. Many students may have a complex notion of citizenship. They may be stateless, where they technically don't have an official citizenship, maybe because one country denies that they are actually citizens of that country. They may have multiple nations of origin, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. They may have complex notions of what home is because they may have migrated to many different countries in their journeys before coming into our schools and classrooms. And sometimes language and literacy experiences are complicated as well. The last presenter was talking about students with interrupted prior education. And that is particularly common among refugee background students because civil war or some other unrest or another climate crisis might have interrupted their schooling and created gaps in their education. Or they might have moved to a second country where the education was not in their home language, nor in English. So they had a third language in which they were educated. So there's some complicated educational backgrounds going on as well with many refugee background students. And then the other thing is that discursively, we know that the term refugee is heard and seen differently and treated differently than immigrant. That oftentimes when people, at least in the United States, what we've seen in media and in education is that there's a focus on what refugees lack. You know, you hear things like they came here with nothing, which is actually not true. There's lots, whether we're talking about materially or spiritually or emotionally or culturally, there's a lot that refugees and asylum seekers bring with them. You hear a lot of discussion of trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, things like that. And of course, many refugees have experienced trauma, but unfortunately that experience of trauma sometimes gets leveraged against them as an excuse for having lower expectations, for limiting educational opportunities. And so what happens with deficit discourse is it becomes dehumanizing, that it sort of perpetuates pity at best, and pity is not what students want and need. They want pride and dignity and support and opportunity. And so we want to be really careful. We want to be challenging that deficit discourse, not only with refugee background students, but with all linguistic minority students. So I'll be drawing from, for the rest of the presentation today, I'll be drawing from an article that will be coming out in a future issue of Linguistics and Education. If anyone wanted to read a draft of the article, I'd be happy to send it with them. My email's at the end of these slides, and also you had it on Betsy's slide. And by the way, I meant to give a shout out to Betsy for doing the coordination on this. This has been a lot of additional time, effort, and energy, and I am so, so grateful that she has helped us to be able to come together on this. Okay, anyway, moving on. So there's three funds of knowledge that I want to emphasize today. Transnational, which is one that I drew from other literature, other scholarship, and then two that I'm sort of adding myself to the mix: sociolinguistic funds of knowledge and altruistic funds of knowledge. So I'll just be briefly highlighting how these have come up in my research, which involves primarily one-on-one interviews with students who are transitioning from high school into college. So I put a couple of sources here that other people who've used the phrase transnational funds of knowledge and kind of shaped this part of my work. So again, you have very complex national narratives or global experiences that many refugees and asylum seekers experience. They may have had multiple migration, so that there again are multiple countries of origin. Many students talk about their journeys, and when they say that when someone asks them, you know, where are you from? They kind of want to say, well, how much time do you have? Because of course, this where are you from might seem like a simple question unless you've lived in multiple countries and don't have an easy answer. Also, one of the things I've noticed in my interviews that's echoed in other research is that there tends to be this embracing of global identities and multi-ethnic identities rather than national identities. Again, because the idea of nation and national belonging is so complex for many asylum seekers. So one of the things I found interesting is that, so for a long time, the largest groups of refugees being resettled in my community were from countries in Africa, particularly Somalia was the largest. And sometimes students would use the term African to talk about themselves, but at the same time, they would be critical of someone from another background using that term because they recognize that it can be used pejoratively, you know, those Africans. So there's this interesting resistance, but also reappropriation of this Pan-African identity. There's also been a lot of interest among students I've interviewed in promoting intercultural competence and resisting racial stereotypes, cultural stereotypes. Again, I mentioned this phrase, those Africans. Students have told me things they've been asked, like, when you lived in Africa, did you sleep in trees? You know, they're very ignorant questions and very hurtful questions. And so many students have said we need more African studies. We need more awareness about the diversity of cultures and languages and peoples and landscapes across the continent of Africa, because that word is used so uncritically, including in the education system. Many of my students come from very large families. The students I've interviewed come from very large families. And sometimes that feels like it's leveraged against them. So I had a student who was the oldest of 10. She was the oldest female, so she was responsible to help out with childcare and some other chores around the house. And sometimes teachers would say things like, oh, with all those responsibilities, how are you going to possibly be able to go to college? You probably won't be able to have a career, will you? And she found that so hurtful. She said, don't make this assumption of what my opportunities are and what my potential is based on what you know or what you think you know about my family and my community and my cultural background. And many of these students are very interested in promoting intercultural competence among teachers too. So as another example, one of the students I interviewed said that this was in high school, she'd been called into the principal's office with another group, with some other girls who had been misbehaving on a field trip. The principal kept telling her, look me in the eye when I'm talking to you, look me in the eye. And she said she couldn't say it at the time, but she couldn't look him in the eye because she had been taught that that's disrespectful, especially as he's an older person in a position of power, and he's a male and she was female, and that was not appropriate. So it's just one example of the lack of intercultural competence that many students have talked about in interviews with me, which has been echoed in other research as well. So sociolinguistic funds of knowledge, this is a term that I coined because I realized that a lot of the literature talks about language in terms of L1, home language use, but that there was a lot more going on when students are talking about linguistic funds of knowledge. So really the category that this falls under is critical language awareness, which is something that I'm currently writing a book about. I may speak a little bit more about that later, but that's what I'm noticing students talking about, and I'm seeing coming through in other research as well. An awareness of how language works in the world, of how language and power are interconnected. So this includes discourse awareness. Again, I mentioned students' resistance to labels like African, or their awareness that the term refugee has a deficit connotation. We've also seen in prior literature that ESL, both among students of immigrant backgrounds and international and refugee, have been critical of that term ESL because they recognize, first of all, it's inaccurate for many students. English might be their third, fourth, fifth, sixth language, but also that it has a deficit connotation. There's also, I wrote an article about counter storytelling, and this comes from critical race theory, that many refugee background students find ways to resist the common narratives about what it means to be a refugee, about what it means to be African or Asian. We have more groups from South Asia coming to Vermont more recently. And then also critical literacy. How can we use language, especially reading and writing, in ways that empower us, that empower our communities? So students in my interviews, and this has been in other research, sometimes are critical of media, but they also use media in some clever and rhetorically savvy ways. And then there's some resistance, what Tara Yasso calls resistant capital, sort of pushing against through using language. And so I've had students who are involved in protests, who are involved in activism work, and I've seen this echoed in other literature about refugee background students, as of course it happens with other groups as well. So the last fund of knowledge that I want to talk about is altruistic. One of the things that surprised me, that I realize now shouldn't have been that surprising when I started interviewing students, was that the vast majority of them wanted to enter what we would call helping professions. They wanted to go into nursing or pre-med or teacher education or psychology. You can see here a list of some of the professions that students have listed, have said were their goals in our interviews. And even students who wanted to go into business or computer science often said, but what I really want to do is have the money and the time to give back to my community. And this is important because there are, of all the displaced people, only 1% of them are resettled. 1%, actually less than 1%. So to be resettled to a country like the United States is an amazing opportunity that very, very few displaced people have. And so they want to give back as a way to honor what has been given to them. And so it's a really amazing resource that is under-recognized and underutilized in the education system. So I want to briefly talk about implications of these funds of knowledge for the writing classroom and maybe for our work in TESOL more broadly. And I'm just going to pause and check my chat here, make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. So implications here. We have to be really careful about using national and international frameworks because, again, this complicated relationship to nation state. So I've been encouraging my faculty and our writing center tutors, instead of saying things like, where are you from or what's your home country, asking things like, where did you go to high school or where do you call home, to recognize that mapping someone to a nation may not be the right framework, especially with refugee background students. Also thinking about ways that we can promote cultural and intercultural knowledge. How can we link that to global learning? And of course, Megan gave some wonderful examples of that in her presentation, to anti-racism work, which I know many of us in the United States have on our radar even more this year, to other diversity, equity, and inclusion work. How can we have refugee background students not only as part of that work, but maybe they can be leading some of that work? And one way they can do that is through writing itself. So as one example, there was a group of high schoolers in my community in Burlington who formed a group called Muslim Girls Making Change. And it was a performance spoken word group. And they performed all around the state. I think they even performed internationally. And one of them is now a student at Middlebury, which I'm very pleased about. So how can we promote critical language awareness? And I'm just going to briefly touch on this, but it's something I'm happy to share about more privately or in the Q&A. So in the book I'm writing, I'm trying to cluster the different approaches to critical language awareness into 4 what I call pathways, or at least right now I'm calling them pathways. So how can we tap into sociolinguistics content and themes, critical academic literacies, media and discourse analysis, and writing as social action, accomplishing things through writing. So I put in the parentheses some examples of kind of themes that fall within that pathway. And this also means that when we're talking about social justice, we want to talk about language as part of it. So I get to teach in a linguistics program as well as a writing program. And one of the concepts that students find really interesting and empowering is linguistic profiling, right? Just as people get profiled based on their race, as evident from their face or their body, how do we profile people linguistically? And that becomes an entryway into talking about the intersection between language and power. And that intersection is really what's at the heart of critical language awareness. Also, those of you that are involved with the 4 C's on the composition and writing side of things, there was a statement put out this past summer on Black linguistic justice. I think we can use statements like that as a basis for conversation, for writing, for curricular development, because students are really hungry to talk about language as connected to social justice. A final implication, if we want to have students who are prepared to enter helping professions to be not only of service, but of leadership, then we have to take their aspirations seriously. We have to resist that deficit discourse that says, oh, these students are lucky to be here, they came here with nothing, et cetera, et cetera. So that means thinking about opportunities for service and leadership, and not just for refugee background students, for all linguistic minority students, including students of color who speak other dialects of English at home or other varieties of English. So at Middlebury, we've been thinking more about who's recruited to be a writing center tutor, who's recruited to be an oral skills coach. I've had more and more immigrant and refugee background students become residential life staff and research assistants, and I'm trying to recruit them intentionally rather than hoping that they show up. In community engagement, especially if you live in a refugee resettlement community, can be a wonderful way to tap into the aspiration and to build that intercultural competence, again, for all students. And then as language specialists or TESOL specialists, we need to be advocating for challenge and support across the curriculum, because too often students get one but not the other. So in our faculty development effort, I'm trying to use both of those words. We want to challenge students and support them. Again, the goal is empowerment and not pity. Collaboration. So we have many, many students who are interested in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math pathways, and I'm trying to find ways to intervene to make those pathways smoother for students who have different educational backgrounds, because right now there's sort of a weeding out process going on. Probably many of you have this at your institutions, where the 100 level biology course or math course is the course that they can't even get through, which then prevents their access to programs like dentistry and nursing and medicine and psychology and all of these pre-professional pathways that they're wanting to pursue.
Okay, Shauna, I'm gonna cut you off right here, although it looks like you are just about done.
Yes.
Okay, we do have only 15 minutes left in our session. So thank you very much for your contribution.
Yes.
And Just briefly, I'm going to give you a slide with everybody's contact information. The presenters have said they are happy to share slides, ideas, links, if you would like to get more information or to revisit what they've presented, as well as references. We've got, everybody shared some really excellent publications that they've written and that they've referred to. So definitely feel free to contact the presenters for more information. As we've noted before, this presentation recording will be available on the TESOL YouTube channel within the next week or so. Those of you who are here will also get an email from TESOL with the link to that video. And it's a publicly available video, so you can share it with anybody, even those who didn't register for the webinar. We do not issue certificates, so please just take the knowledge that you've gained from this session and run with it. There's no printed proof that you were here, but that really shouldn't be the purpose of joining this session anyway. So thank you, speakers. And we do have time now for some questions from the audience. So if you would like to post a question in the chat, we can ask it, or yeah, let me know if you would like to turn on your microphone and actually ask it aloud as well.
Hello there.
Hi, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Also, I noticed the speaker who mentioned about certain uses of systems. What if you use both Microsoft Teams and use learner management systems for formative measurement, so students can type up their own sentences, let's say on Canvas and let's say on Jupyter, without the use of those other apps? Would that be suitable to enhance learning for writing skills or other classes in general?
So are you directing that specifically at Carrie Torres, who was talking about digital tools?
Yes, for Ms. Torres, yes, in particular.
Can you repeat the beginning? I didn't catch all of your question. I'm sorry.
All right, how about the utilization of both Microsoft Teams in conjunction, let's say, a learner management system for active engagement for student writing, let's say through Canvas or Jupyter, other than using those other items that you showed in the presentation, for students to demonstrate their writing skills or for formative assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I'm not familiar with Jupyter and Microsoft Teams, but I think that the tool is not as important as the purpose of the tool. So what I think is most important is if we look at the barriers in our curriculum that the students are facing, we look for areas where our students are going to face these challenges, and then we think about how we can support them. So I just shared a variety of tools that are free, but anything else that can fit that same need, that can fill that same purpose, is absolutely fine. And I think it's really important to think about the goal rather than being stuck to a tool. So I'm really glad that you brought up this question. Because again, you know, some of these tools that are out may disappear and we'll have to learn new tools. But the main purpose is to just think about what is the goal and then how can I support that? So you can do things on course management systems. You can set up digital bulletin boards and collaborative documents in other ways. So yeah, great question.
Other questions? Feel free if you're, okay, so we've got a question in the chat for Megan, who is not with us anymore. So feel free, Christine, to email Megan. She had to leave for another engagement. But if others of you would like to answer this question as well, how do you encourage faculty from across the university to use resources that you've got available and to really think about individual students rather than as stereotypes.
I'll say a couple things on that. I think sometimes you have to start with very concretely what's on the minds of faculty. And for many of them, it's grading, right? It's how do I get through these papers? Oh my God, this is not what I expected to see in writing. And so oftentimes I use a conversation about grading. How can you spend less time grading, spend less emotional energy grading, and get the most bang for your buck when you're grading, so to speak, to be most efficient in your grading. And then we use that as a starting point for talking about expectations around language and then broadening our conception of what students have to offer and all that other stuff. But it's often an issue of grading or plagiarism are the two things that often get them contacting you, probably if you're an ESOL specialist or a multilingual writing specialist. And so I don't necessarily want that to be the frame that I put forward, but that often becomes the thing that draws them in. So if I offer a workshop on responding to student writing, that's often going to bring in people who would not come if I said funds of knowledge of multilingual writers or something like that, right? So I think you can be pretty pragmatic in advertising things, and then once they're there, broaden their perspective.
Thanks, Shauna. Any other questions for our presenters? We've still got about 8 more minutes in our session. Feel free, if you've got a question, just turn on your microphone or pose it in the chat.
How about utilization of sample essays? This is for Ms. Torres, because we have to look at how to help students look at sample essays and provide questions about, let's say, a narrative essay. What makes this a narrative essay? And provide specific questions. What's the thesis statement? And how does the paragraph summarize? How does this narrative essay relate to you? To utilize some sort of, I'd say, questions to build up awareness on how to write better styles of essays, whether it's a narrative essay, comparison, and look at sample essays to be positioned to be ready to write. Ms. Torres.
Yes, so that's a great point. I think having students dialogue and discuss and develop those critical skills is really important. I typically start by giving examples. So for example, if we're writing a narrative, I would give examples of several different narrative pieces of writing so that they can see what it looks like. And then typically I do an overview of what my expectations are. And then when they look excuse me, then when they look at an exemplar, they have those questions. So is there some sort of introduction? What is in the introduction? Is it introducing the things that I saw in those exemplar essays? So it starts by having them look at what it is. For some of our English learners with disabilities, they may not have enough understanding of the expectations of academic English writing. They may have understanding of how to write academically or how to write in general in their other languages that they're proficient in, or they may not. But I try to give a really clear picture and then explanation of what I expect in this genre. And then they go through, after I've modeled it, then they look at another one and then they pull that apart themselves with my feedback.
So like you give questions and then students write their answers in response to a model essay. Like how do the transitions play a role for let's say if you have a process essay, how do those transitions play a role for making this essay a process essay?
Yeah, you can definitely do that. I don't typically have my students write their answers to that. I have them sort of highlight on the text, either if we're in person or now on Google Docs, and just identify, and I have them say what is the function of a particular cohesive device or transition, but I don't have them do additional writing just to minimize the additional writing that they're doing outside of the requirements for my course. However, you certainly can. I typically have them do that just with notes or via discussion in Face-to-face classes, I would have them do it in groups, so they would discuss with each other and talk through it. But you could certainly have them write it out. That would be, I think that would be effective as well if you have the time for that.
Write it out, and then they share with their friends, and they write their results, or they type on a board, like say on Microsoft Chats or on a learner management system. They look at the essay on Microsoft Teams, on a PowerPoint, they look at it, and then they type the questions that are related to the essay to develop empowerment.
All right, Robert, I think I want to actually step in because it sounds like we've got some other questions in the chat.
My apologies.
So,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Feel free. I'm leaving up the panelists' contact information because any individual questions for presenters, you might want to just contact them directly.
All right, my apologies.
No worries. But I do want to see, we've got some other comments. I'm trying to scroll through the chat and see them.
May I quickly jump in?
Yes, please, go
I
ahead.
think I included that in the chat, but I would like to quickly maybe say here. I just asked, especially for Dr. Shapiro, how do you think these funds of knowledge will empower students to increase their agency and autonomy? Because in the end, or at the end of the day, we want them to be more kind of expressing themselves, taking more agency, empowering our learners. And then how do you think these funds of knowledge and then these practices will empower them at the end? Any suggestions? Thank you.
Shauna, I think that one seems to be primarily for you about funds of knowledge. Shauna, are you muted? Oh, I think we lost. Oh, there she is. Okay, I see your video. Can you now turn on your mic?
Yeah,
okay,
sorry.
excellent.
Did it freeze up for other people, or was that just on my end?
I think that was just you.
Oh, I'm so
But
sorry.
Anyway, so.
Yeah, I think I have a 16-year-old who's online. Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I think it's really important that what we ask, right? That goes back to that idea of exchange value. So a few things. I think when we focus on assets, then we start to think about opportunities for refugee background students, right? And for other groups as well. So thinking about jobs that they could hold, whether it's as writing center tutors or residential life staff, right? Or as an RA, a research assistant for someone who focuses on international issues. For example, we have a political scientist who studies representations of immigrants in the media, and he's been recruiting students of immigrant and refugee backgrounds to serve as his research assistants. So they can have concrete opportunities, whether it's for jobs, whether it's for academic access to different things. And then I think the other thing is, I feel like the conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion often don't include multilingual students as part of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And so we have all these efforts toward anti-racism on our campus, and no one thinks about how we might include international students, immigrant students, refugee background students. They're thinking primarily of African-American students who were born here, which is an important group to attend to. But those students actually want to be conversing with other groups. And so at my campus, we have to connect the international student group to the students of color groups, for US students of color. And so I think connecting students, and then as we talk about globalizing the curriculum, making sure that we have all of those different groups of students as part of that effort, and in some ways guiding us in that effort, I hope are some ways to be promoting agency, or at least to be promoting asset. And then of course we have to be asking students, what are you looking for, and where are we not meeting the goal? And I don't think we talk to students enough about what are your goals right now, how have they changed, how can we help you get there? So, but I still appreciate the question.
Thank you for your answer, and then I also appreciate your point in addition to those African-American, concerns, and then how, for example, international students are being conceived, and then what are the things that we can do for them is very, very important. Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yes. All right. So we are unfortunately out of time. I would like to once again encourage you, please do write to individual presenters if you have questions about their specific topic or suggestions, recommendations, and do stay tuned. You will be getting a link from TESOL with the full webinar recording on it.